If you've noticed some increases in your portfolio of investments in recent years, you can thank the United States Federal Reserve for at least some of the gain. That's because the Fed has pumped billions into the economy there in an effort to prop it up. 3 times the Fed has announced a program called quantitative easing. Since December of 2012, that third-round program has stimulated the economy at a rate of $85 billion a month. In total, the Fed has pumped more than $4 trillion into the economy. The program has definitely been a boon for stocks. Everyone knows, though, the party eventually ends, and the end of all that stimulus has loomed over markets for some time. Last week was a pretty good example. Last Wednesday, bad economic data hammered stocks right around the world. The S&P 500 was among the hardest hit, at one point on Wednesday down about 3%. Since then, it's back about 4%. So why the big rally on Thursday? Much of the credit goes to remarks made by one Fed official. James Bullard, president of the St. Louis branch of the Fed, said inflation expectations are declining in the U.S. That's an important consideration for a central bank. And for that reason, I think that a logical policy response at this juncture may be to delay the end of QE. Delaying the end of QE would mean more stimulus and easy money fueling the purchase of stocks. That's a prospect that helped reverse the sell-off. It had investors wondering, will the Fed continue the stimulus longer than we thought? Well, not so fast. Over the weekend, John Williams, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, apparently contradicted his St. Louis counterpart. He said, I haven't really changed my view on the economic outlook. So one Fed official says more stimulus may be needed. Another says the plan to end QE continues on track. Where does all that leave investors? The last word goes to Rudyard Griffiths, chair of the Monk debates. So one thing I found fascinating about this is that there were these conflicting statements. Now, Fed heads can disagree. Obviously, they get around a room and they can debate, and some have votes and some don't. But saying QE might continue is gasoline on a fire. So it actually seemed in some ways to me to be a little irresponsible for Bullard to say that publicly.
Well, let's take this debate one step further. Why was he doing it? He was doing it to talk up markets. He was doing it because they're concerned about a potential collapse in equity prices and the negative wealth effect that would have. You know, I worry, Amanda, about
those are not immaterial concerns.
Yeah,
though.
But I worry about regulatory capture. You know, where in a sense the Fed is now so beholden to markets, it's so invested in quantitative easing, it can't admit, as many people have pointed out, that the effects of QE may be negligible on the real underlying U.S. economy.
Absolutely. But so here's the quandary that they find themselves in. Possibly negligible, although we'll never know, right, the alternate universe that would have existed without it. But certainly we've seen an effect on certain asset classes, and stocks are a prime example. Well, there is a real economic effect if you see a precipitous decline in anything like real estate or stocks. And so maybe it is the central bank's job to calm everybody down and say, you know, stimulus is slowing, it's not ending. And by the way, as long as we keep the bonds on our balance sheet, it's not as though we're shrinking anything.
Okay, but here's the fundamental danger of that approach. The market is now the addict. It is addicted to QE, is addicted to Fed intervention. It thinks, and it briefly last week for the first time maybe thought otherwise, that the Fed didn't have its back. And the reality is, beneath the surface, the Fed doesn't have its back. We've had zero bound interest rates for 6 years. They can't cut to stimulate growth. So they're left monkeying around with QE and other kind of exotics in terms of monetary policy. And Amanda, I think the whole thing is an emperor with no clothes.
Well, I agree with you on that. The thing that really bothered me about the rebound in markets was they declined for rational reasons. They declined not for anything particularly new, but concern about global slowdown, concern about deflationary pressures in Europe, geopolitical concerns, all stuff that we've known about. It's not as though anything happened particularly. And all of that is still in place. So it does suggest that there is an investor out there who understands this to be a straight trade, that as long as the Fed is stimulating, markets will be higher than they need to be or ought to be, and certainly higher than they would be if there was anywhere to go. I mean, if there was another asset class to get into, I think the markets that probably would have
But is that a way
down.
to run the world's largest economy? In effect, you've turned over the engine of the economy, the stock market.
Crack dealer? The Fed shouldn't be the crack dealer?
Well, I'm just saying there's a certain irony here that the birth of free markets and free enterprise has now basically allowed the core of its capitalist system, the stock markets, to become the tools, the playthings of the Federal Reserve and what Bullard thinks one day, Yellen thinks another.
That may be a bridge too far, though. I mean, there is still a pretty good functioning role for capital markets, and there is a reason to stimulate. You do want capital to flow, and you want it to be deployed. And we are seeing American corporate profit and investment as a result of exactly those monetary policies. So it's not as though it's just some kind of crazy Frankenstein's monster situation.
Well,
this is an important part of that functioning democracy.
I mean, let me challenge you on that. Other people are saying no, that there hasn't been a real systemic change of the underlying economy. Wage growth is stuck. Unemployment, yes, has gone down, but that's because a lot of people aren't in the workforce. What this Fed and Janet Yellen did, and I thought it was just so hypocritical of her to get up and give a speech about economic inequality last week, they have empowered the investor class, the global asset class, at the expense of Main Street Americans, at the expense of savers.
Well, but hold on.
They've empowered speculators.
But the responsibility is not with the Fed. I don't disagree that has happened, that for the first time in history, we're not seeing high corporate profits turning into higher wages. That's a new thing. And that's something that's confounding economists, and there are a bunch of reasons for it, as various economists are expressing. But that's not the Fed's fault. All the Fed can do is use the one lever at its disposal, and it's done that. It's done it quite effectively. It is a policy lever. I think that's why Janet Yellen's perfectly placed to say, guys, we've done everything I can do. Now over to you guys for the fiscal levers that say redistribute this income, find a way.
With midterm elections, with Obama on the road,
I agree, but she's still the right person to say it. She's not wrong about it, right?
We needed a tougher Fed chief than Yellen. We needed Paul Volcker to come back. He didn't even give forward guidance to the markets.
Paul Volcker's 109.
Well, they lived in fear of him at least.
But we're talking about forces here that are so new that people actually don't necessarily know how to interpret or understand them. And I say people, I mean economists at the Fed are still trying to figure out the ripple effect of what's happening here.
You might as well have the head of Goldman Sachs running the Fed for all the difference it makes in policy.
Well, the head of Goldman Sachs is running everything else. If you look around,
the giant octopus.
Goldman are everywhere. But I just don't think there's a big conspiracy theory about the Fed. I do think that the other thing that was highlighted last week is the Fed's a little terrified of when it does have to withdraw stimulus. It does have strong market reactions that could have adverse economic reactions.
Get ready for QE4, get ready for QE5, get ready for a $10 trillion Fed balance sheet.
I've said it before. I think rates go down before they go up in America. I think it'll be true in Canada as well, by the way.
We'll see.
And take that bet?
Well, any day.